I treat this as compliance as a form of censorship, as in censorship by compliance burden. You're adding so much of compliance on different types of stakeholders in the internet ecosystem that they will choose not to do those things. This kind of regulation is a restriction on our free speech, not just our ability to create, but also our ability to consume content. Basically, you're creating regulations to restrict the freedom of digital media, digital news, and we know and we've heard that 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 online content creators like Dhruv Rathee, as an example, have had a significant impact in terms of how people perceive the government, especially during the last elections. Goes up. So basically, what you're doing is telling people they'll have to create their own internal censor board. I remember in sometime around 2014, there was a discussion that the TRAI had held about um, about regulating cable television, and there was a famous anchor from a famous television channel who now runs his own channel, and he came and he said, "You're creating more regulatory burdens for cable television channels. What are you doing about online?" All of us are not just consumers of content, we're also creators of content. And that's the difference between traditional media and digital media.
Hello and welcome to HW News English. A controversial bill by the Modi government is in the works, one that can significantly alter the landscape of not just digital media but creators at large. The Broadcasters Service Regulation Bill 2024. The draft bill has been criticized for its vaguely worded provisions, lack of transparent discussions with all stakeholders, and even potential censorship. The government remains tight-lipped about what this proposed legislation intends to do so far. In the Rajya Sabha, all that it said last week was that the stakeholders' consultation is currently underway and that the bill is still at the drafting stage. The draft bill will have to be passed by the Union Cabinet before being tabled in Parliament. But what are the larger implications of this proposed bill? We spoke to Nikhil Pahwa, founder and editor of MediaNama, to understand this better. It's an insightful conversation. Do watch it till the very end. Let's begin. Mr. Pahwa, thank you so much for taking out the time and speaking with me. I want to take this conversation one step at a time so that viewers are also on the same page with regards to what we are talking. Let's start with the broadcast bill. Now, this is two drafts for our audience. This is a proposed bill that was the second draft of which was put out recently. In fact, not even publicly, to select stakeholders. Mr. Pahwa, let's start with the basic question. What does the proposed broadcast bill aim to do?
By the looks of it, the proposed broadcast bill seeks to replace the old Cable Network Televisions Act, which was used to regulate broadcasting in India, and replace that with a bill that regulates not just the cable network televisions folks, not just as traditional broadcasters and news entities, but also um, not just digital news and digital streaming services, but also bring into its ambit online content creators from both India and across the world. So it's a significant expansion of the scope of regulation of broadcasters to include everyone on the internet potentially, and create a significant regulatory overhead for them in terms of a lot of compliance requirements. Um, and so I think it's extremely worrying, the expansion of the scale and scope, um, and so the treatment of normal internet users, treating them the same as you would a traditional news broadcaster or a traditional streaming or a traditional TV channel.
So you're essentially saying it expands the scope and includes various people under its ambit. In terms of a
including
digital,
global
sorry,
including global stakeholders.
mm-hmm. You're saying it
So,
includes,
so, so,
yeah.
so, so for example, the broadcast bill would cover anyone in the United States or Europe or anywhere in the world who is, from a news perspective, who is writing about news as a part of a systematic business activity. So, someone who might run a Substack newsletter and take subscriptions, or let's say run a YouTube channel and take money using Patreon, or someone who might even, uh, if you're a real estate company and you have a blog that writes about real estate news anywhere in the world, you would be covered under this bill. So the scale and the scope of the impact of this bill is just substantially widened to include not just those in India, but globally. Taylor Swift, for example, would have to uh, create a content evaluation committee in India and comply with its for certification. She would have to send her songs for certifications in India before releasing them globally. If this bill is followed to the T.
Right. I want to come to the definition of what they've defined as a digital broadcaster. Do people who not speak about or to circulate news or have content related to current affairs, are they also included in this, or is it just the digital media or journalists that will be included in the definition of who a digital broadcaster is?
So there are two definitions here. One is an OTT broadcaster, and the other is a digital news broadcaster. When it comes to news, if you go beyond a particular threshold and you do news as a part of a systematic business activity, which is not defined, you are a digital news broadcaster, which means if I run a blog, a personal blog, and then I run Google ads on my personal blog, and when I used to run a personal blog in 2003, I ran Google ads on them. Um, I would be treated as a digital news broadcaster if I post anything about news. If I meet the threshold and let's say I don't cover news, then I'm covered as an OTT broadcaster. So all podcasters will be impacted if they discuss news. So there's a great show for money called Planet Money that will be covered, and that discusses news and current affairs related to the movement of money in the world. That will be covered probably as a digital news broadcaster. And then there are great podcasts like Freakonomics, which is informative but not news. And they take money through Patreon and they host offline shows. So you can see it's a part of business activity. They would be covered as OTT broadcasters and need a content evaluation committee.
Right. So um, now I want, you talked about it has a lot of requirements. Some people I read online, they said this will take us back to the license Raj. What is it about this licensing bit for that will be applicable to the huge number of people that really would fall under the ambit of this bill?
So, if you look at it from a licensing perspective, don't need permission from the government of India to do what you do. So it's not exactly a license, but it is akin to license Raj because you need to, for example, within a month of passing of this bill, intimate the Indian government about the existence, about your existence, and then they can use this for compliance. So, in the sense, you would have to sign up with a three-tier regulatory structure if you are doing news, um, where you need a content, where you need to first set up a grievance redressal mechanism, so people can file complaints about your reporting of news. Alongside that, you need to join a self-regulatory organization, which under the IT rules would require to have um, a retired judge at its head who can adjudicate on your content if a user files a complaint with them. If that doesn't work, or if the user is not satisfied with the response from the judge, they can then go to a government advisory council. Now, all of this compliance means that there is an overhead in terms of the work that you have to do additionally. You might have to hire more people to deal with these situations. Um, there's a cost attached to it, which means that you might not end up doing this as a systematic business activity or as a side gig. Now, if you are a non news entity, you have a fourth level. to comply with, which is you need to create a content evaluation committee. That content evaluation committee has to have someone from women and child welfare, someone from SC, ST, and other marginalized communities who would need to certify your content before it goes up. Obviously, the government is not going to pay for a million people or more to set up content evaluation committees. Remember, travel bloggers will need to set up a content evaluation committee, food bloggers, fashion bloggers, um, agents. So this cooking shows will need it, and so all of this content will have to be certified by them before it goes up. So basically, what you're doing is telling people they'll have to create their own internal censor board. So while this might generate employment for potential future censors, it means that the cost for creating all of this, and someone as large as a Mr. Beast might do it because India might be a big market for him. But a lady in her kitchen who's basically doing food shows may not be willing to do it, so she might end up stopping doing the food shows or stop making money off those food shows altogether. So I treat this as compliance as a form of censorship, as in censorship by compliance burden. You're adding so much of compliance on different types of stakeholders in the internet ecosystem that they will choose not to do those things, and so you'll never know what got created and what didn't get created effectively. Um, and we've seen an impact on streaming services as well. There are shows which have been shelved. There are shows uh, uh, there is censorship that happens on online streaming as well. It's not as bad as television, but we find that many streaming services are now only putting out censored versions of uh, of movies because they don't want to go through this additional compliance burden anyway.
Right. Mr. Pava, I want to focus on a very critical aspect of this proposed bill has been the discussion with stakeholders, MediaNama, and in fact, Hindustan Times has reported extensively on the meetings and how the second draft was not really put out for consultation. It was just given to select stakeholders. So, how do you see this playing out? Because effectively, the scale at which you are trying to, like you said, censor or regulate creators, you're not sharing the bill at large, but instead you're just sharing it with select stakeholders. How do you see this happening over the last whatever months this bill has been in talks for?
So, in response to a parliamentary question from Rajya Sabha MP Jawahar Sarkar, who used to be, in fact, the CEO of Prasar Bharati once upon a time, the government of India has said that the public consultation was done last year in November, which is true. And they're saying that the bill is currently a draft version of the bill is still being prepared. But the fact of the matter is, 2 weeks ago, they invited some companies. I don't know exactly a number, but it's in the double-digit numbers of companies to take a copy of the draft broadcast bill after they had held some 3 or 4 meetings with them over the last month and a half. Now, this version of the bill had diagonally across it a watermark, and each copy was numbered. So if company A got a copy, they would have been given, let's say, a number 7 or 8. Company B got it, they would have had 13, 14 kind of a thing, right? So they were given specific numbers corresponding to the company. So, A, the bill is not public. Even though there seems to be a substantial change in the applicability and implications, the bill has not been made available for public consultation. But B, there's a private, secretive consultation that's going on. Um, and I'm not sure about what the intention of the government is over here as to why they're choosing to hide the bill uh, if they don't want it to become public and don't want to see the implications because it might affect a large number of people who might be opposed to the bill, then perhaps they need to actually do the public consultation to get that feedback. Because this kind of regulation is a restriction on our free speech, not just our ability to create, but also our ability to consume content. We never consume the content that isn't made public, right? Or rather released for us to choose to view. So I'm extremely worried about the approach that the government is taking over here, and I think this should be a public consultation.
Right. In your first answer, you briefly talked about like a global applicability of the bill. One point, I just said, in fact, something that you pointed out, that in the first draft, uh, when you define persons, they've kept individual who's a citizen of India. In the second draft, reportedly, that citizen of India bit is not there. When you say global applicability, is it uh, practically even feasible? So, if say somebody is sitting in, I don't know, perhaps US, and there's an issue with the content, does this proposed bill, if it's passed, of course, if it passes the scrutiny of Parliament as well, does it mean that India is technically also looking at creators abroad?
India is looking at creators abroad. This bill is applicable purely, and I can assess that simply because they've amended the bill to remove the restriction that it's only applicable to people who are citizens of India. Uh, is it feasible? No, it's not. Because think about it, right? Uh, there must be over a billion creators in the world today. If there are 5 billion odd internet users, there must be a billion people who are creating content on the internet at least. Some of them might be monetizing through uh, ads or as a part of a business activity. So even if you say that it impacts 200 or 300 creators online, 300 million creators online, I don't think you can rationally expect 300 million creators from across the globe to come and register with the government of India. And it's not going to happen in any case, right? What is going to happen is that when the government wants to go after someone, they will throw the rule book at them. They will go, and the bill basically empowers social media intermediaries uh, or it sort of empowers the government to direct social media intermediaries to ensure compliance by specific creators. And in that sense, it lends itself to a censorship mechanism where social media intermediaries can be asked to censor certain creators who do not comply with the regulations. And so globally, you might find accounts and creators censored, and others will not, because even though they've not been compliant, it's not been enforced on them. So this bill is arbitrary. It's meant for arbitrary implementation by design, and to my mind, that makes it a bad bill uh, because they know they can't implement it to its fullest extent.
Right. Two quick questions, Mr. Pao. First, on digital media. Now, we've seen especially in the last, I think, 8 to 10 years, the role of digital media, the kind of reporting that the digital media has done. Um, it's really noteworthy given the times we live in. For a journalist, even for an independent journalist who does not have the backing of an organization, what are the repercussions as far as their freedom to report, the freedom of speech is concerned? Because they are not doing it without doing their job without any major financial backing. They're just going out there, reporting, putting out their stuff on YouTube, Twitter. What effect will this potentially have on free speech, especially for journalists doing their work in today's times?
So, from a journalist's perspective, it gives the government the power to direct social media platforms to censor certain channels or censor certain accounts. And see, what's happened is that people who have a following, or even if they don't, they've been able to come out of nowhere and basically build a platform or build their own channel and keep doing the work that they've been doing for traditional channels, so to speak. So it allows them to start something on the internet with virtually no cost. And that's the beauty of the internet. There are tools and platforms and services that are available almost for free, which allows you to create something of value. The compliance burden that comes in over here will deter some people from doing this, because there's going to be a regular cost attached to grievance redressal, a regular cost attached to signing up with a self-regulatory organization. Um, the government already has powers to censor. under the IT Act. Uh, but and here this is adding compliance on top of it. So our speech is already effectively, when it comes to reporting, regulated. It isn't that regulations don't apply to us in any case. It's just that the government is worried that their digital media platforms is where independent creators have gone, and these are independent voices with independent critique. And because they aren't as perhaps easy to control or as pliant as traditional media, they now want to create a regulatory structure that helps them control online media. Um, and it's already had an impact. I remember in sometime around 2014, there was a discussion that the TRAI had held about uh, um, about regulating cable television further, and a lot of cable TV people turned up pushing back against those idea of that additional regulation. It was an open house discussion, and there was a famous anchor from a famous television channel who now runs his own channel, and he came and he said, "You're creating more regulatory burdens for cable television channels. What are you doing about online? Why isn't?" uh, and he specifically mentioned entities like Huffington Post, which were operating and being available, made available to Indian audiences over the internet, but without the regulation that traditional media has. Now, if you look at what happened in 2020, the government passed a regulation, a press note, which basically equated online news with traditional media and created a foreign direct investment restriction on digital media, which means you cannot raise money from abroad beyond 26%, which also means you can't sell your news entity to another person, but also that a foreign entity cannot come out and set up news operations in India to target the Indian market. They can only do it as a bureau. So what happened post the IT rules, which again brought more regulation for digital media? What happened then? Um, Huffington Post India shut down. Yahoo News India shut down. Right? And Huffington Post had done some of the best reporting over the period of its existence in the country. Yahoo News India did some great opinion pieces under Prem Panikar when he was editor. All of that's gone, and none of it will be created again in the future. So there is a mechanism to regulate. This is basically you're creating regulations to restrict the freedom of digital media, digital news, and we know and we've heard that that online content creators like Dhruv Rathee, as an example, have had a significant impact in terms of how people perceive the government, especially during the last elections. And perhaps that's why there is extra territoriality built into it, because he's based in Germany. Uh, but there is regulation for others also, including Ravish Kumar. But how do they regulate these guys? And that's why such a broad regulation that covers all and sundry.
Right. So essentially, the vague nature of the ambiguity has been done to include everyone from a Ravish Kumar to a Dhruv Rathi to even digital media platforms that are doing their work. Right.
Well, it includes anyone who tweets about news, for example, and has a substantial enough following, and maybe does influencer campaigns. That's on the news side, right? So, um, it's just the scale and the scope of this is just too broad. The net has been cast too wide.
Right. My final question, Mr. Pava, what is it in this proposed bill that should worry a consumer? Because we've seen people now just switching to digital platforms to consume their news, watch entertainment, uh, shows, movies, etc. What does this proposed bill mean for a regular consumer, not even news consumer, just a consumer who uses the internet on a day-to-day basis for their whatever content they want to consume?
So, look, for many of us who've grown up with the internet, it is the most diverse, the most plural, and the most accessible medium that exists. We also view this on our private devices. We learn from what happens across the globe. from what other people are saying. I know many startup founders who watch podcasts or listen to podcasts from uh, and focus primarily on news that's happening in Silicon Valley because it impacts their business here, right? So the internet has brought us this the length and breadth of content from across the globe. But there's also one other important thing to remember. All of us are not just consumers of content, we're also creators of content. And that's the difference between traditional media and digital media. Uh, is that all of us can create. Someone like a Ranveer Arabadia can start with a small little setup and start doing the kind of content he wants, and now become one of the biggest uh, online talk shows in India, right? It's that it's a I mean, I started out with a blog that became a media company, and we use only online as a medium for our reporting. So the internet gives us that opportunity. Traditional media was the privilege of a few who could afford to have uplinking and downlinking and buy newsprint and take on, which meant that there wasn't enough opportunity for them to come in and create. So what's happening over here with this bill is, one, your ability to make something of your own is getting restricted as a creator, and everyone wants to be an influencer and a creator today because they see that as an opportunity to really pursue their passion instead of doing a 9 to 5 job. The other is, even as consumers, the diversity of the content, the plurality of the content, the fact that you can view global content will get affected by this bill. And so I think this is a significant restriction on free speech, both in terms of creation as well as consumption. And I hope that this doesn't pass as a bill. In fact, if it has to be restricted, it should be restricted only to traditional media as it exists. Otherwise, it should just be junked. But if it does become law, I hope that the Supreme Court will do something about it.
Right. On that note, Mr. Pahwa, thank you so much for speaking with me to our audience. We'll keep tracking this space for you. Like we said through the course of this conversation, that this is a bill still in the draft state. It's a proposed this thing. It'll have to go through the scrutiny, then the Union Cabinet, and eventually the Parliament. So we'll be tracking that space for you. Thank you so much for watching, and do subscribe to HW News English for more such conversations.
Stay ahead with our cutting edge news app. Instantly access the latest shorts in just 1 minute and breaking news in just 50 words. Download now for a smarter, faster news experience.